No one minds me nibbling on some nuts, right? Don't know where I'm going, but I'm gay. Oh, I like that.
That I like that movie.
Probably not. That was epic. Welcome to UnPack-It, the unruly and inappropriate show where former cult kids read the books of their former cult. I'm Patty, and I make a podcast with my sister Nancy. We're the Apostate Sisters, and for this show, we collaborate with our good friend Joel, who runs a TikTok and a YouTube channel called Mr. Difficult, where he makes content about the cult that we grew up in. So, tonight, we're continuing on reading through The Missing Dimension in Sex, written by Herbert W. Armstrong for our parents when they were in the cult. So these books quite literally shaped our upbringing. So we're reading it to you so you don't have to. And we're deconstructing everything we find along the way.
From what I understand, because I did read this book prior to us actually going through this series, I think this is the part where it starts to get good. Like, I feel like it's a boring as shit book, but I mean, I think it gets interesting at this point because we've had to kind of improvise so far to make it a little less stale. So here we go. Let's see. We're partway through chapter 7. A person's conscience may be seared with a hot iron. We can have a false teaching so deeply burned into our minds that we are given over to believe a lie. Armstrong, of all people, would know how that works, for sure. We were taught to believe lies our entire childhood and into adulthood. We read in 2 Thessalonians 2 of those who have been indoctrinated with Satan's delusions, that God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie. Because of this ungodly teaching that sex, even in marriage, is degrading and shameful, countless wives, even after coming to a knowledge of God's truth, are utterly unable to bring themselves to feel right, as God intended, about the marriage relationship. This is actually a form of perversion. Yeah. Mental perversion in which the mind has been trained to reject what is holy and good and God-ordained, as if it were something evil. It is incurable by human means, incurable except by divine miracle. It takes God's power to set us back on the right path, apparently. So,
Of enjoying fucking.
yeah.
Yeah. So by this page, I would tend to think that Armstrong was like very anti-purity culture, but yeah. It varies page to page.
That's why my eyes were so wide, because I'm like, who's calling the kettle black?
Most assuredly, some who will read this book will find themselves in this category. With their minds, they will now see the truth. Yet, in the marriage relationship, they will automatically freeze up in dread. They will, in spite of true knowledge, feel dirty with a sense of condemnation and guilt. This has been brainwashed into their subconscious minds.
You don't say.
Burned in, as if cauterized, and cauterizing deadens sensation. Like foreskins, for example. To enjoy the rich blessings a loving God wishes to lavish on every true wife who follows his laws and is led by his spirit, you get rewards for obeying, Patty. Isn't that enlightening? God's truth must not be merely recognized by the mind. It must be acted upon.
Wait, to go back to your thing, Nancy, you just said it was like a reward for doing well. So are you saying that the husband's member is the thing that is of the greatest reward for paying attention and doing wifely duties? It's your reward for making the sandwich at the end of the day.
Here's your reward. I'm going to stick this in your mouth.
So,
Enjoy.
Trade an eggplant for a sandwich?
I don't like his wording here. It must be acted upon.
And he's like getting bigger and bigger. I think truth is among the biggest caps that he can create in this book.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So, but it must be acted upon. He's saying that as saying that must be acted upon is the woman needs to get her shit together and love doing him.
Mhm.
Right?
Right? I think that's how I took it too. Like it must be
Yeah.
acted upon.
More than just
Your reward.
internalized. Yeah, it's like it's doer and thinker of the word. Yeah.
It's kind of like I went way out of my way to get you this gift. How dare you reject it?
That's a very good point. Yeah, kind of like a stalker mentality. Going back to the stalker mentality we were talking about. To all this length to do this for you.
And
Ooh,
couldn't
yeah.
that directly
manipulator.
correlate? Yeah, yeah. And couldn't that directly correlate with the whole concept of, well, Jesus died for your sins, so you're forced to love him?
I'll never forget, and I brought this up before, is that missionary that told me when he said that shit against me, and then he said to me, "You're compelled to forgive me."
Fuck him.
Oh, like not even really an apology at all at that point. He just told me right in my looked at me right in the eyes and said, "You're compelled to forgive me." And that's when I pointed at him and said, "You're in no position to tell me that."
Every victim of this foul, satanic mind branding should pray earnestly, prevailingly with the whole heart to the holy God to remove root and branch that false concept. Pray as David did, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit, attitude within me. Is he saying that spirit actually means attitude?
It can mean essence, the Hebrew word at least. It can mean like someone's like demeanor. So yeah, attitude I guess would be like incorporated into that. So I
Because
guess it's right.
asked so many times what the word spirit and spirituality means, and I still don't have a clear
The
idea
word
what the
in
fuck it is.
Hebrew just means a gust of wind. And so the term was extended to mean like your what we would consider your spiritual essence, but the actual word means wind, like a breath, like the movement of air. And so in the spiritual sense for humans, it was believed that because we breathe, that our spiritual nature comes from that animation. So
Okay.
that's yeah.
That in essence, I can get on board with that. Yeah, that you've actually clarified it a lot better than most people ever have for me, Joel. Thank you.
If you want another piece, the word for soul means throat. So it all is encapsulated there. So the word for soul means throat, and the word for spirit means breath. So it's the two working with each other.
When David, filled with remorse and emotion, prayed this prayer, he was brokenhearted repentance because of his sex sin with Bathsheba, wife of Uriah. He was repenting of his wrong attitude towards sex. He was beseeching God to take this dirty attitude of lust out of his heart. Nobody wants their lust to go away, except to, rub one out and take care of that little thing. To create in him a clean heart and to restore a right spirit or attitude, a right concept towards sex in his mind. Please, God, I am begging you to clear this shit up. I do not want to think about these beautiful tits anymore. Oh my God, stop. No, nobody does that. They want to think about the glorious tits. They don't want lust to be taken away from them.
I have definitely had a problem reevaluating. Am I looking at a person as an object or as an actual individual with sovereignty of their own mind? Now, fantasy is one thing, but I'm talking about completely viewing a person in a totally different way.
Oh, I do that with men all the time.
The thing for me, it's I think there is a distinction where it's let's just use an extreme example. If I were to go talk to someone who had just filmed a porno, for example, I would treat them very much as an individual with someone with their own mind. But I could very well like appreciate the work that they had just completed. And that to me, it's like I like to view people as individual human beings. Yes, I am attracted to certain parts of the male anatomy. However, I do like to look at people as wholly as possible, which in my sense combats what I see a lot of men do when it comes to like leching, I guess you could say, after women. And it sucks to say that because I don't like the gender distinction. But like here he is, Herbie is writing negatively about women like this whole entire time. How about the men that like just like look at people as just objects to be played with, like Herbie did? Anyway,
Yep.
there was one quick thing I wanted to say about Bathsheba. David, did he repent from that whole situation from Bathsheba? Because he took her on as a wife and Solomon was their child together. So
Maybe it was okay by then. They got married. You know?
yeah, it was all fine. Yeah, it was fine. They just sealed the deal. It was totally fine. Yeah, totally fine. No issue. No.
According to Armstrong, all marriages are blessed by God, which means that marriage, I guess, God blessed it. So
please parse that one out for me. So David killing Uriah, or at least inadvertently killing Uriah, was something that was chastised by the Lord. Cool. So should he have taken Bathsheba on as a wife? Well, he still did. And so it's like, and then going back to your concept, Patty, that David's called a man after his own heart. And so yeah, there's a lot with that stuff. And
well, did he face any consequences from that? It sounds like he did that, really, because it sounds like it worked out great for him.
His son died, so the first child that they had together passed away, because the Lord said that child was made in sin. And then there was David was given a choice of 3 different things. I don't remember all 3. My mother would. But like there was a choice of 3 things, and David chose a plague to go about the people as his recompense. So he chose for other people to be hurt from his own sin. Yeah, it is a huge convoluted mess, that story. And yet people say, and I brought that question to people before, what he did was deserving of death, and he did not die. Talk about compromises that God makes, and that God calls him a man after his own heart.
Well, yeah, that he would wreak destruction, harm on others in order to avoid responsibility for his own actions.
And it also shows God's favoritism, because David should have died. If we are so Torah observant, like we say we were, or like we said we were, he should have died.
Another example of how the elites are not subject to the rules that everyone else is. If you hear these stories over and over, you're gonna just internalize that idea without it ever having to be said. Well, that's not funny, fun, or sexy. Let's keep going.
I'm sexy, though.
Oh, I mean, Mango, you're always sexy.
Okay, read again and again. Yep, for sure. This and the preceding 3 chapters. He's really expecting people to have been that interested in it the first time that they would actually read it and read it again.
I think he means the biblical chapters here, but hopefully he does not mean his book's chapters.
No, he's referring to his book's chapters, I think.
Because the next line is read all the biblical passages.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. He did. Shut up. Oh.
Learn to obey God gladly, wholeheartedly, in love and loving anticipation. I'm sorry, I have to pause for a moment. The fact that the word obey and love and loving anticipation in the same sentence.
I thought that was headed toward obeying the Lord, but he's saying obey your husbands.
And then, because then he goes into a passage here from the Bible. When he commands, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. So he's not just saying obey God wholeheartedly and with loving anticipation. He's saying to your husband as well, you need to obey. Are we surprised?
Well,
No. It's
this is
really gross to see it in wording like this.
This is why it's so strange to me to read passages like this, and I know that that's what we espouse. Like, I do remember the language of women becoming subservient to their husbands. However, I do know of in the WCG that pastors would or ministers would be behind the pulpit and would actually say, yeah, that wives should submit to their husbands, and then in the next breath say, but most of their husbands don't deserve their wives. And like what I mean is like really, and actually putting an entire sermon on the men rather than the women by focusing on where men fall short and pinpointing their misogyny and stuff like that. The church espoused misogyny, so
Mhm.
it's weird, and it clashes with what I hear.
I think it's interesting this next point. I'll just read it. Even as husbands are commanded to love their wives, so wives are commanded to give love to their husbands. He's trying to make it seem like, oh, it's just an equal thing here because husbands are also supposed to love their wives, but it doesn't say anything about the husbands obeying their wives,
I
right?
particularly don't like the use of to give love to. I
Right.
ugh.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Okay, it literally says husbands are commanded to love their wives, but wives are commanded to give love to their husbands.
And that's not what it says, but he's adding that word give to be like, that means you need to fuck them willingly and excitedly and be in anticipation of it.
Well, there is a Pauline reference where Paul does tell spouses. I don't remember if it's only to women or not, but he basically says don't rob your significant other of the sexual gratification because that can drive someone crazy. And so it's like, yeah, that's one thing he did say. So I don't know if he's like making reference to that or not.
I would say
I
in
don't.
reality, you got to have open communication about that and check in on everybody's needs and make sure their needs are getting met. And, there are all different ways that people meet those kinds of needs.
I
Like
think that if a
self-care is a thing.
yeah. I think that if a man's needs are not getting physically met, and it doesn't have to be the man, I'm just saying, and they take issue with that clearly because that's what they want, and I would say some other need is not getting met within the woman. It always starts with that. If the man is not getting his physical needs met, she's not giving up sex or whatever the fuck you want to word it. Her needs are not getting met first. Something is going wrong. Something is maybe putting her off, and maybe that's
or trauma, like stuck
yeah,
behind trauma
trauma,
too. Yeah.
and that's what they need to get to first to see why. I was listening to Chewed Gum Pads, and there was an episode where a guy was like, he was very sweet about it, but he was taking all the appropriate steps to figure out why his wife was just not having sex with him because she has traumas, and he's trying to help her because he needs these met. It's not like he's not forcing it on her. He's taking the right step, and she'll get there.
I know of a swinger situation where it's like the one is traumatized and is so uncomfortable with who they are,
Yeah.
but has given the go ahead for the significant other to have experiences with others in a swinger type of situation, and it doesn't affect their relationship. Actually, the other party didn't want to do it. Like, you know what I mean? And it's like, but like going back to that, you do have physical needs that do have to be addressed
Right.
type of a situation. The thing is, though, but none of that whole conversation degraded another person's feelings. Never. It's like the whole thing was put with two people coming together in love and talking to each other and working things out for themselves, and like not one being selfish over the other, instead both being selfless toward one another. And so yeah, that was really special.
That's kind of beautiful.
So God's law, God's way to every happiness, safeguards this holy, pure, righteous, personal and intimate, loving marriage relationship. It has God's blessing. How many times has he said that so far? Quite a few. Travel this way in prayer and thanksgiving. in love and in deep gratitude to a benevolent and loving God.
Okay. Frank New Testament teaching.
Who's Frank?
That's what I was going to say. Let's see what Frank has to say.
You forgot his name
Wow.
already, Joel. Last night.
That was as close as we're going to get to a Yo Mama joke for Joel.
Wait, no. No, I got a better one. I'll go after the House of Yahweh with this one. It's not oh God, oh God, oh God. It's oh Elohim, Elohim, Elohim. Or Yeshua.
Frank New Testament teaching. Now study the 7th chapter of 1 Corinthians. Okay, how much of 1 Corinthians? Are we going to end at 13 and then jump into whose hips lift up? Okay, the Bible, as originally inspired, speaks out in plain and frank language. Is that like the Frank and the Beans? Okay, not only against every
I'm trying to figure out your last comment.
What do you mean? What?
Well, I mean, is it the or the?
Is it the Frank or the Beans?
Right.
Not only against every misuse and perversion of sex, but just as frankly instructing us in God-ordained right uses. Here we go. Remember, we read the Bible as it has been translated into the English language. Remember, we read the Bible as it has been translated into the English language. Correct. Some translations, especially the authorized King James Version, were made at a time when sex was universally regarded as shameful and evil. The King James translators tried to cover up the true meaning, feeling it was not nice to speak so plainly. But every original word was inspired by God's Holy Spirit, and it's time we throw off Satan's false accusations that some of the Word of God is not nice. It is holy and sacred.
What about those copies of the Bible where they have like clear fornication on the on the margins and various weird drawings that are in all over the margins of those old Bibles, and a lot of them are sexual acts.
Surprise, surprise.
So is he saying here, like, because there's a lot of different translations of the Bible, he's saying that we clearly know the truth because the Holy Spirit will guide us what it says, even though humankind has like changed the wording of the Bible all this time. We know the original because, I don't know, the Holy Spirit tells us.
Secret code that has to be deciphered.
I mean, because King James Bible was like the Bible for the longest time and sometimes still is. Yeah.
Oh, there's people who are very devoted to it.
Okay,
which I
I'm
don't
looking.
really understand.
It doesn't seem to have the same illustrations that I'm used to seeing in other European versions of the Latin Bible, but it does have illustrations. But some of those Latin Bible illustrations, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Illustrations, awesome.
For this reason, the Moffat translation will be used, as well as the King James, in expounding this crucial New Testament chapter on sex. The Moffat translation renders the inspired original Greek in the English words of its true meaning.
What's the Moffat
This
translation?
is a page, by the way, of one of those Bibles.
What is going on here? Am I seeing this?
I have no idea what's going on there, but don't tell me they were prudish back then.
That's from a Bible?
Yes.
Joel, send me that immediately.
It's a prayer book, so it is related. So it's like a devotional. It's like their version of devotional. Oh, well, you got a dragon eating someone's foot, someone doing a handstand, got the butt arrow.
Butt arrow?
The way you said it was amazing. The butt arrow.
I just said it to Nancy. I would call it a butt arrow.
I mean, the drawings even look like all other mythological drawings. It looks like stuff out of Beowulf because it was from the same time.
Yeah,
Same
exactly.
shit.
So yet we're sitting here calling them prudes.
What's the name of this prayer book, Joel? Like, where'd you get it from?
I don't know. I just know of these illustrations. I think it was also in Bibles and stuff like that. It was all in a lot of medieval books. This is just one example. This is called the Rutland Psalter, a 13th century English prayer book held in the British Library, one of the most densely adorned manuscripts of its time. Whatever the hell all this shit is, it's really interesting stuff.
But that's mythology. It's just a bunch of weird shit collected together of who knows what people were thinking back then. I don't know.
Honestly.
I mean,
I'm sure it all made sense to them. There was reasons that these images were expressing whatever they needed to express.
Or they had some better natural drugs back then. I don't know.
This was written originally as a letter from the Apostle Paul to the Church of God at Corinth, but it was inspired through the Holy Spirit. It is part of God's word for us today. Cool story, bro. We have seen earlier in this chapter that in his 5th and 6th chapters, the apostle was writing about sex. There were sex abuses, sex misuses in that church, which God, through Paul, condemned. But we have seen how Paul, in the latter part of the 6th chapter, taught that husbands and wives, through God's sacred marriage institution, should glorify God in their bodies by giving love through sex between husband and wife, as well as by keeping their bodies clean from fornication, adultery, or misuse. Chapter 7 continues the instruction from God of this true God-intended use of sex. Notice verses 1 and 2. Now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Notice that. Get its real meaning. Every man and woman should marry. But why?
Clarify. I don't think I quite understand.
Because it is a sin to remain single? No. Verse 1, it says it would be good for a man not to touch a woman. That is, to remain free from sex and unmarried. It is not wrong to remain single. Then why does this passage teach that men and women should marry? Does it say marry in order to beget children? No. It says nothing here about the purpose of marriage being reproduction. Why then? This scripture answers, to avoid fornication. Paul has just been condemning premarital sexual intercourse, fornication, as a sin which breaks the 7th commandment.
I don't think Armstrong ever pushed the idea that we have to have children, right? He didn't. Because for him, it wasn't about necessarily the reproduction and getting your numbers up and getting, more people into your church. That's more of an evangelical thing. He was all about like, no, we're the chosen ones. So, I mean, if you have babies, fine. Whoever God chooses to be in his kingdom. I don't think he pushed the issue at all. Did he? That people have to have kids?
Do know that at least in the domain that I grew up in, that it was expected and that people were seen as being cursed by God for not having children. But in terms of what the church itself espoused, I don't know. It's similar to like the doctor thing. Did the church ever say directly you cannot go see a doctor? No. But what was the general mantra? It was you can't go see a doctor, and we have countless stories of people who didn't. I just checked for you, by the way. I've heard of the Moffat translation, and I wasn't sure. It's a paraphrase. So it's funny because I remember the WCG hating on paraphrase translations of the Bible, and yet the Moffat translation is a paraphrased version of the Bible. So it's like my translation of the Bible, the New Living, that's my favorite, the New Living translation. People always like poo-poo on that because they perceive that as a paraphrase, when it is not. It is comparable to the New International Version, but in comparison, the Moffat translation is a paraphrase, and he's pairing it with the King James of all. Like, that's crazy if you know anything about the literalism of translations and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure a paraphrase is a pretty good place to find lots of different meanings within it. If it's, it's paraphrased anyway. So
where were we?
The plain teaching here is that to avoid sexual intercourse out of marriage, a man and woman should marry. Have sexual intercourse in marriage. This has God's blessing. This is commanded by God. to avoid the sin of fornication, unmarried sex, and to have the sexual relationship with God's blessing in true love, let men and women marry. The purpose here given is not reproduction, but lawful and righteous sexual intercourse instead of unlawful and sinful fornication. This becomes even more plain as we proceed.
He is definitely saying that sex can be used without the intent of getting a child. Plain speaking. Now verse 3, let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. The King James translators in the year 1611 tried to translate this in modest language, and this largely covers up the true meaning. However, benevolence does mean disposition to do good, charitableness, love. Now read it with the false modesty stripped away. In the Moffat translation, which I just checked when we were off doing our thing, is very paraphrased. The husband must give the wife her conjugal dues, and the wife in the same way must give the husband his. I don't inherently disagree with that interpretation. Okay, and the word conjugal means sexual or marital. Yeah. Notice in this verse, what the text basically says is that don't rob your significant other of that. Don't hold it away from them like a carrot on a stick. That's the way I read that, at least. Anyway, notice in this verse these points. The sexual relation in marriage is a command. The husband must and the wife must. Notice next, God's principle of giving, sharing. Each is to give this sexual intercourse love to the other. God does not speak of it in terms of carnal taking or receiving sensual gratification, but in terms of giving love, especially with Armstrong writing for us. Continue verse 4, Moffat. A wife cannot do as she pleases with her body. Her husband has power. And in the same way, a husband cannot do as he pleases with his body. His wife has power. Yeah, I can actually be okay with that.
I'm not.
No, in terms of like in the Christian domain of a significant other relationship, like I was saying, like the same concept of don't hold the carrot on a stick. That's the way I read that section. I don't know if Patty has something different, or if you have something different, Nancy, go ahead.
I just don't like the idea that anyone has that much power over someone else's body. Yes, we can.
I agree.
Permissions for certain things, but no, it's not like I own my husband's body. That's his, and he can share with me whatever he wants of it, and vice versa. But
I think a healthy way to frame it would be like if you were to say, "I give permission for like if I permit my body," and not in a bad. If I start phrasing it that way, it's going to seem as if I don't like the other individual, and that's the thing. It's like I think both individuals are individuals. And they love each other, why shouldn't they? But one shouldn't hold it over the other, nor should one feel subjugated in order to give that to the other. It should be with a confidence behind it.
No, the entire thing is consent. It's consent at every moment and every encounter. It's consent between those two people. As soon as you layer assumptions because you've married them, like, ooh, you've got problems.
Well, and keep in mind here that he says a wife cannot do as she pleases with her body. Same with the man. Like you're taking away that person's right to their own body. Oh, but this person over here has the power because you married them. So like we don't have power over our own body, but somebody else does. No.
Why do you think a woman was passed from her husband or from her dad to her husband? Who didn't have control over her own body.
I hate that concept. I really do. And when I read sections like that, it's horrible.
That's the Bible.
I know it is, and I don't sit well with it. That whole concept of trading women around like chattel. I hate that. So this whole conversation about like giving power and stuff like that, like you just got me into this thinking mode, Nancy, because I'm like, so in a Christian marriage, regardless of who, I'm just thinking here is like, is it true in my mind that the husband would have access to the wife's body and the wife would have access to the husband's body in that way? And I just don't define it that way. Like me personally, I know what the text says, but I can't sit well with the like you just expressed, and I just wanted to say, I agree in that like it shouldn't be that the other owns the other, even though it's like maybe in word but not in actuality. Because what I mean by that is like, let's say I get married to someone that's like, I probably would be like, yeah, I'm theirs and that type of thing, but to also recognize at the same exact time that my body is my body. Notice how the principle of God's law, that of love, of giving, of outgoing concern, rather than selfish gratification, is stressed. It is a command. A wife cannot. It does not say ought not. It flatly forbids, as contrary to the law, and consequently sin, for either husband or wife to use his or her body selfishly. The wife, made frigid by false concepts, must not withhold sexual intercourse from her husband. Her sex organs do not belong to her. These are not my words. They belong to her husband. I have to say that. Yeah. Like the way that it was phrased there really made me uncomfortable there. Like the other stuff, whatever. This stuff is like very blatant. Because going back to that concept I just shared, it's like when you're, for example, Nancy and your husband. It's like, yeah, I'm his. I'm sure you would that type of thing, that in a cutesy way. But like to actually believe that your entire body is owned by him.
I own his body often.
No, well, that I don't have that much of a problem with.
No, it's just this is so gross.
Yeah, that particular paragraph there. Yeah.
When he says the wife made frigid by false concepts, sexual intercourse, I'm assuming his wife Loma did that to him.
I think he might be writing out of spite.
I think he is, because I've read up on her too, and just the horrifying things that she was.
I saw some pictures of her recently, and I'm like, oh, she does seem like that type. That would have been so like almost like a nun, like that type of personality. In the same way, a husband cannot withhold participation in coitus from his wife.
Yay, we get the coitus coming in.
Part 2. Or conversely, neither shall a husband make inconsiderate demands on his wife. I agree. So that he may use his sex organs as he pleases for his selfish gratification. His sex anatomy does not belong to him. Christ bought both husband and wife with the price of his very life.
He shouldn't do it for his selfish gratification, but when he wants to do it, she should get on board.
Yeah. So what about that black book that Armstrong had?
Ew.
I mean, he had his own gratification right there in page format. Do as I say, not as I do. Actually, our bodies belong to him. But he, here, gives the right and power of the husband's body over to the wife, and the right and authority over the wife's body to the husband. Yet the teaching of God, the way of his law, denies selfish taking and demands considerate giving. The motive and intention here are involved. Actually, it devolves down to direction of mind and intent to attitude. The man who argues that this verse of God's teaching gives him the right to make inconsiderate and selfish demands on the use of his wife's body, arguing that her body belongs to him, overlooks the fact that his motive and purpose is merely to use his wife's body for his own sensual gratification without any consideration or outgoing concern for her wishes. I agree with that. I actually agree with that paragraph. That's what I'm trying to say there. I think there is a distinction of selfishly using versus adoration for the other.
But where's the fine line? Sometimes,
that's a good point. Yeah,
you just need to get it out because you're that horny, and it's not like you're disrespecting.
But you can do that yourself. That's the thing. He's well, yeah, you can't masturbate, can you? But what about that flog log that he has? Right. There are times in the life of any married couple when it would be cruel totally inconsiderate, utterly selfish on the part of a husband to demand his own satisfaction and gratification by use of his wife's body. At such times, God's teaching, when understood, says the husband's sexual apparatus.
You like that word, Joe?
Apparatus? It's an appendage. It's an appendage, okay? It's a dongle, okay? It does not belong to him. He has no right to use it selfishly at cost of pain, suffering, or mental harassment to the wife. God commands each husband to be considerate of his wife's feelings, to be tender, gentle, as much concerned for her desires and comfort and pleasure as his own. On the other hand, there are times when sexual union is a definite need for a husband.
Mhm.
At such times, the wife must be considerate and not defraud her husband. At such times, she must not claim her body belongs to her and deny it to him.
Ugh.
That is marital rape. At
Yep.
that point, it's marital rape. Then again, the selfish, frigid wife who deliberately denies love and coitus to her husband. Is she talking about Lola? Merely because she isn't in the mood, is violating God's command, which says a wife cannot do as she pleases with her body. Her husband has power. Her body belongs to him.
I think he caught his wife Loma masturbating once, and it pissed him off, and he wrote about it here.
It might have been. And not to mention, remember, this book was published around the time of her death and of the time of his divorce from the other lady.
Huh.
God's law at all times makes you wonder how good of a husband he was. The way of love, which is concern and consideration for the other at least equal with that for the self. Selfishness becomes lust. Love flees when the whole concern is for the self.
How are we supposed to ensure that we are not using our partner selfishly? Isn't there some element of selfishness in it always? Like,
it is. I think the concept is balance.
But how do you distinguish something like that?
Everything's transactional, and if we accept
Right.
that and we want to treat each other fairly, that's where we can move forward and be like, hey, this is an energy exchange. I want to get as good as I give, but I'll give good, right? It's an energy exchange. As if someone's giving, someone's getting, and it really works great if that's happening mutually. And I think it's fine for us to expect that that should happen mutually when it comes to things like sex, especially.
When it
It should happen mutually.
When it comes to things like sex?
When it comes to things like sex.
Yeah,
And that's the thing you choose to do together, not like, I'm going to do this to you.
I think there's some people out there that have never had an actual orgasm. It's like,
oh, yes.
You know, it's like we're expecting one person to fulfill all our sexual needs, and we're not supposed to do it ourselves. We're not supposed to go to anyone else. That is absolutely unreasonable.
Well, and not just sexual needs, all needs. Like
all needs.
Like almost all, right? All from the opposite sex.
Financial, yeah.
Yeah, and that layer too.
I'm trying to think of any area that was not affected by our thoughts in the WCG. I don't think there was anything.
It all got touched on.
Inappropriately. Verse 5 of this 7th chapter of 1 Corinthians becomes still more plain. Do not withhold sexual intercourse from one another unless you agree to do so for a time in order to devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again. You must not let Satan tempt you through incontinence. And yeah, this is where I don't disagree with Paul. What I'm saying is, I think Paul was onto something. I give Paul the credit that he was very forward thinking for his time. And so when considering what he was saying here, he actually was being very revolutionary by saying that women also have power in this dynamic and to stop like holding things away from each other. Although he said, there is a time and place for that. Like if you devote yourselves to prayer for a time and fasting and stuff like that, then you come together, you make an agreement about it before, and then you come after. Quite literally, you come afterwards. So, so I think he was very forward thinking in that domain because we can see human society progressing from Genesis to the point where Paul was saying these things. Why do we have to hold ourselves like shackles to what Paul said?
And look how much farther we've come since then. We have full-on conversations about humanity and consent and that kind of thing. And, we're slowly rooting out the things that were hurtful about that time. Like there's an awareness of, trafficking of humans, not okay. Okay, well, we get that now. It wasn't understood then, seemingly. Right? So, I don't know. It's helpful in some ways to recognize we are progressing. And so doing anything to say, let's hold to the values of this book from 2000 years ago makes no fucking sense, dude. Like,
or at least I would say with the rose-colored glasses that a lot of people put on when they read it.
I mean, we do that for anything. We're going to read anything we read through the context of who we are and what we've already experienced and read in the past. Like,
very true.
There's no other way we're going to read a thing is then through what we already know about the world.
Now, notice that same verse in the King James Version. It shows that abstaining from sexual intercourse in marriage except by mutual agreement at infrequent intervals or for either one to selfishly deny coitus to the other is actually defrauding the other.
Why do I feel like laughing every time I hear coitus? I think it's because the show Big Bang Theory.
Yes, that's what Sheldon calls it. Amazing.
In other and plainer words, to practice what falsely called Christian teaching has demanded for 18 and a half centuries, withholding sexual intercourse except for begetting children, is a direct violation of God's teaching, is itself sin and disobedience to God, and is, oh my goodness, can the calves get any bigger, defrauding one's mate.
Look how progressive I am, guys. I've gotten all the way to women still have to do it if their husbands want to do it. Woohoo! But I'm progressive.
His wording is so bad, like defrauding each other as if people, I know he's referring to women here too, by the way. He's not talking about men. Men are always up for getting it on, right?
He would say otherwise, but his own actions say otherwise.
He claims it's defrauding each other. I'm just saying there's a bigger issue going on. It's not like the other person is purposely trying to punish them necessarily. I think 9 times out of 10, there's just a deeper emotional sort of issue going on behind the scenes that is causing that person to not want to physically communicate because the emotional aspect is not communicating somehow.
I 100% agree and understand what you're saying, although I have heard that angry sex is some of the best sex.
I agree, but we're talking after an argument. Like
I know. I just wanted to throw a curveball.
Is the idea of defrauding like taking something away that was owed them or cheating them of what was owed them?
Yeah.
Because that's what he's saying, that the woman owes that to the man and she's like defaulting on her loans or whatever the fuck.
This dualistic paganism piled up a mountain of human woe and frustration through these 18 and a half centuries higher than all the geological mountains of earth piled on top of the other. It taught millions of husbands and wives to disobey God's commands, to commit sin, and the human suffering is the evidence. Obedience to God's law brings happiness and joy. Sin brings suffering, misery. The very fruits, of this medieval prudery demonstrate that it has been the way of sin. Like those pictures they drew in the margins. Here then is that same verse 5 in the King James translation. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. So
it's not about talking and like communicating with your significant other. You fast, you pray, and that is supposed to make the problem go away, and all will be right in the world. You go back to having a great sex life. Is that what I'm reading? All right, next section. Painful experience speaks out. Not only does Almighty God, through the Bible, speak out in plain language. If anyone reads the Bible and thinks that's fucking plain language, I'm sorry. You're deluding yourselves. Against this pagan and medieval teaching, the voice of cruel experience also cries out. This stern teaching that sex must be used only to beget children has put marriages beyond count into an injurious, impossible situation. Augustine, Aquinas, and the church fathers who preceded them in their chaste severity could see no love in the marital union. Marital sex, except for procreation, was viewed always as lust, degrading, and sinful self-gratification. And even if a husband and wife mated, there's the word mated again, in coitus, mated in coitus, okay, for the express purpose, so it's mating in coitus express version, of begetting a baby, they viewed it with suspicion. Of course, those men, at least Augustine, and those priests after him, including Aquinas, never experienced the happy joys of married love. Augustine's conscience was racked with guilt over his fornication and sex vices. Was he? He never married. He largely influenced the establishment of priesthood celibacy. Yeah, apparently since the dude was not married, he knew nothing of its happy and blissful joys. You know,
no, but he says it next. He's saying the next line is he was not without quantitative sex experience. He's not saying the guy didn't have sex experience. He's saying he didn't experience it rightly because he never married.
But all that experience was motivated by concupiscence. Whatever the fuck the word that is. Is that something to do like
I don't know.
Concubines?
I actually don't feel like looking that word up because I think he used a thesaurus for that, and I don't want to look it up for that reason.
Okay.
I think you're right, though, Nancy. You connected it to concubines. I think you've got a root word connection going there.
He never experienced the giving of love in marriage. He knew nothing of its happy and blissful joys. All he knew by experience.
Did Armstrong?
Inordinate self-desire followed by the conscience-stricken pangs of self-condemnation and guilt. Such men never experienced that clean, wholesome love of a pure wife, mingled with respect, admiration, high regard, esteem, and honor.
As long as she does it when I tell her to.
Yes. Is he trying to convince himself of all these things? Because
Yes.
It sounds like he is really trying so hard to convince himself that he preferred this over banging a bunch of chicks, which I'm sure he preferred and probably did when he went to the Philippines on his private jet and had all these beautiful stewardesses, as he called them, which he did. He was like Trump. He said he loves beautiful women. You really think he didn't plow a bunch of them? Of course he did. But he's trying to make it seem like, yeah, I had everything I could possibly need in that wife of mine, and this would have been in her later years. So, you know. Yet thousands of intelligent husbands and wives, victims of that repressive teaching, have come to see, in spite that teaching, that the expression of pure love between husband and wife through coitus is every whit as vital a purpose as producing children. Of course, probably the overwhelming majority, blinded by the false teaching, never discovered this. But where did it leave those who did? Thousands of case histories, and I know of enough to be sure of what I am saying, have found that this repression robbed their marriage of spontaneity and joy. There are times when circumstances dictate either the spacing of the next child or else that there should be no more children.
Is he advocating Planned Parenthood?
Hey, it's all about interpretation, right? Even in the case of couples who have discovered the true, clean, and beautiful happiness of giving and bestowing love in the sexual union, where does this teaching leave them? They have been sternly taught that they must hear the church. To disobey this teaching, they have been led to believe will mean an eternity of indescribable torture of burning forever and ever in hell. This has been made real to them. You don't say.
Here it comes, the WCG theology.
They are filled with fear and the terror of it. They dare not disobey their church teaching. And usually they want to obey it. Really? We do? We want to obey churches? Okay.
He's talking about people who warm pews. Yes, he is. He's talking about general people in church.
Do they, though? I don't know if I believe that. I think a lot of people go to church and they don't actually want to go, but there's other reasons they do, whether it's...
I think he's getting at the people who actually want to be there, who do strive to follow God's, like, what they perceive God's, like, law to be and stuff like that. However, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of people who just warm it.
I think there's a lot more people than we think that don't actually want to be there, but they fear hell. They fear the repercussions of not going to church, societal norms, all that. There's a lot of different reasons I think people go to church, but do they actually go there and legit want to be there? No, they think they have to most of the time. Not everyone's like you, Joel, that loves studying the Bible.
I mean, but he's saying that. He's saying people want to do it because they want to obey this thing that they've been convinced is right, which the way they were convinced is through fear and terror of hell. So he's, by proxy here, he's saying they want to do these things because they're fucking afraid that they're going to go to hell or be annihilated if they don't.
Because Sky Daddy is going to spank them.
So what happens? They strive to live without sex. Sex comes to carry the hateful meaning of fear that destroys love. Is there really that big of a population that doesn't have sex at all because they think it's shameful and guilty? Like what time period is he referring to here? He's fixated on this one little section of people here that
I think he's talking about Catholic priests again, like the clergy.
I know, but that's
maybe
he's making it seem like the whole fucking world thinks this. They don't.
I'm wondering if he's speaking on the American condition at this point, because the only country or set of countries that I can think of that has been so damn prudish when it comes to sexual stuff is the British Commonwealth in the United States. So yeah, it's funny because this goes back to the concept of British Israelism there.
Mm-hmm. Many in their desperate dilemma have gone tearfully to their parish priest for counsel and help. And if and when they are told that the only difficult is lack of self-control, they are really frustrated. They may struggle and wrestle with the one allowance of the church, resorting to the rhythm method. Is he talking about jerking off, or am I?
What is this?
I can tell you what the rhythm method is.
Okay.
The rhythm method is birth control. It's non-birth control, birth control. So the rhythm method, the joke is, what do you call people who use the rhythm method? Parents. Because the rhythm method is you're supposed to avoid doing it at her ovulation time. But that doesn't account that sperm live for up to 5 days and ovulation does not happen on the same clock that we would like it to within this woman's cycle. And so there's enough variables there that the rhythm method is not necessarily your best choice if you want to avoid pregnancy. So
nice.
And the rhythm method would have been like a thing used by, for our parents used it. I don't know why.
How do you know that?
They were really, I think our parents were really against like hormonal birth control stuff. So that might be why. But anyway, that was how they did it. And it only messed up once because only kid number 4 was a oops. We were planned, and apparently the rhythm method worked really well for our parents because my mom said she got pregnant with me, and maybe I'm not sure, on the first try, like the first month that they were like, let's do this. But so he's saying that method didn't work. Like, well, yeah, there's a cultural joke around it. It didn't work so much because also a woman is way more interested in having sex when she's at her time of ovulation because hello biology, it knows what
I wonder why.
In desperate determination, they restrain themselves for what is calculated, often erroneously, to be the prescribed period. Then often they find this method simply didn't work. I'm glad you, Patty, as a parent, you knew what the rhythm method was. That's I interpreted it very differently.
Yeah, me too. I'm sorry, the what?
And today, many priests are beginning to see in their hearts, if not in public statement, the evils of this traditional misteaching. Man, he's really got something against like Catholic priests, huh?
He had a hard on against priests. I do remember that.
I guess. But again, I still feel like he's making it seem like this was a substantial portion of the world believing these things, but it's not. Today, many doctors admit that this rhythm method is a faulty theory, as we've seen in our fourth child in our household. There is no part of the month during which all women are, for a certainty, immune from conception. Is that true?
I don't know, actually. Because I was just about to say, back to that comment that you just said. I was about to say, I mean, how often have you gotten your child from that?
Well,
Where's your baby?
9 rounds in his rifle.
You need babies.
Why don't you impregnate a female, Joel? See how well that works for you.
I am a man. I am a man that can make his own decisions, okay? So I have that choice. I have chosen to let the women have their own men. I have decided that I am ordained by God.
In fact, I just watched the trailer for Come Sunday. I was going to try to watch some of it this morning while I was doing some other work, but yeah, it's only available on Stars.
Be careful with it. It was really rough on me, and I still have 50 minutes left. Like, I am slowly going through that shit.
You know, I'm not a Christian, though. From what I gather, it's just the interpretations of the Bible, right?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. The reason why I react so strongly is because of my own personal life experiences.
I know.
Really
I know it's going
coming
to impact
across.
you. It's not really going to impact me, though, because, again, I never believed this shit, any of it. And so to see a bunch of Christians squabble with each other, I just see that every day. Moving on, there may be a decrease in probability, but the matter is only relative. Medical charts show conceptions occurring at any or all times of the month.
Okay, I do have something quick to say about that. He
Okay.
said medical charts show conceptions occurring then, because here's what medical charts do, which doesn't really make sense. Medical charts ask for a woman's last date of her period, right? And they just go 14 days back from that and say, boom, that's the start, or something like that, right? It's a thing where they do it formulaically to determine a woman's due date, right? But it's not true. The conception date, like, isn't going to fall according to that medical chart. They just use that to give women their due dates. It's known inaccurate, like, because we don't narrow things down to like, oh, it happened on that day, because it's only going to happen because there was sperm present when the egg was released, or quickly enough after the egg was released. Like, but yes, it's true, women can have their egg release at many different times of the month, but it's still within kind of a window, because there has to be at least 10 days after the sperm and the egg meet up for the pregnancy to stick, because it has to travel down into the lining of the uterus, burrow itself in, release a hormone to say, hey, I'm here, don't shed and don't have your period. And if the ovulation happens too late in the cycle, there won't be enough of that time, and that fertilized egg will just be perioded out. I don't know exactly why he's making a big deal about this, to say that, is it to say you shouldn't use the rhythm method, which would indicate there should never be a time when a woman says no? You know, like, is that what he's trying to get at? Because the rhythm method definitely indicates that there's a period of the month that you're watching the woman's body to say, you don't do it during that time.
Why is he using medical charts to begin with? Isn't by this point he's still...
I thought that earlier.
Because he started writing this back in a time period when, yeah, that was still a thing. I don't think that ever officially went away, actually. I think the divorce and remarriage program did officially go away, but not forbidding people from going to doctors. I think that stayed in a certain form.
I get so convoluted with it now because it's like now I'm encountering other individuals who are also part of the WCG and knowing all the regional differences now. I just sit here going, I honestly don't know anymore.
It
Right.
depends.
When it comes to that particular subject.
It kind of serves the afterlife of the WCG here. The fact that we all took in, you know, like we kind of took from his stuff what our presets were, you know, all the people that were the first generation to come to WCG, because whatever resonated for them based on their previous non-WCG life, they could find in his stuff somewhere, right?
Yeah.
He was going to hit every point. And so then that meant that it created all these differences in the way it played out differently for different families. And it's kind of serving him well now, because now all of us are getting together to talk about this, and we can't pinpoint. We can't just be like, here's what the WCG said. Here's what was done to us, because all the stories are just so different because the tenets were never that tight.
There were certain ones that were, and that's where I agree with you 100%. Like with the doctors, the makeup, the hair, the subservience to husbands, the all that stuff. But there were certain concrete things that the church absolutely held as doctrine. One thing: no Trinity, no hell. The concept that we were part of the Godhead family, like which he talked about a lot, like that we were part of, like that we saw that we became one with God. Yeah, that's a WCG teaching. Reading Genesis with an old Earth creation mindset. That's a WCG thing. So there are certain things that are absolute. British Israelism, huge one. But then the Sabbath observance, of course. The holy days, of course. But the minutia of things like the doctors, the how to rear your children, that type of stuff was kind of shaky, and I think could change depending on the minister and the region. Oh, and for clarification, for anyone watching that doesn't know about the WCG, yeah, ministers were kind of like movable. They're kind of like Catholic priests in that they don't have one location that they look after. They were moved around a lot, just like priests. And so this like that's another thing too, is like we couldn't get too comfortable with a certain minister because that minister would soon shift off to another location as well.
Yep.
That's intentional. Yeah.
Yeah, that was intentional. I think we had previously discussed why. But yeah,
Well,
that's
it
another
served
topic.
Armstrong keeping his ministers in line, and it kept people, like you're saying, kept people on the edge too. They couldn't like become buddies with the minister and get things past it.
He liked that instability. And so millions, under the whiplash of this unscriptural teaching, even if they had once found the joys of true marital love, find their marriages twisted. Wives become frigid. Husbands become frustrated.
So what about husbands when they don't have a sexual desire?
Exactly.
Question.
You think women don't get frustrated? Tell you what, a lot of women, and I don't want to be gender specific here, but a lot of women have that emotional neglect, and they need that in order to perform sexually. Again, it goes back to desire. It goes back to feeling heard. So if they're frigid, that could easily be traced back to the husband.
But I think you're right. These are not gender specific. Like we have cultural ways we think of it and stereotypes we've applied, and there's probably good reason for that, but it certainly isn't that black and white, male and female, to say that the woman wouldn't be the one with more desire and the man being the one to say, hi, you yelled at me all day. Like, why would I want to fuck you now? You know?
Yeah. I think from these words that Armstrong is basically implying that women don't have desire or shouldn't have desire, but it's just love that they require. As long as they sexually provide for their husband, they'll get the love they seek. Like
That's
as if
the
somehow
thing.
us women don't desire sex too.
Yeah, that's IBLP teaching as well.
Yes. I have read some of their stuff. Case histories by the uncounted thousands prove that the biblical way, once rightly understood, is right. And its fruits, like you, Joel, are abundant happiness and joy. But man's way, whether of medieval prudery or modern promiscuity, produces only the bitter grapes of wrath. That is the end of chapter 7, and we'll start with chapter 8, the biological differences, next time. Oh!
I would just like to point out a couple of section titles in the next chapter so that everyone can, start anticipating chapter 8. Things like women, different from female animals.
Or what evolutionists don't know.
All right. Thanks, everybody. You have made it. That was it. We have finished chapter 7 of this book. You haven't made it to the end of a book, but what you've made it through is the boring part. So next, we're going to look at chapter 8, which is all about the biological differences. And from there, it gets even spicier. So
Yay,
if you've been
finally.
with us this long, get ready. It's about to pay off.
Yay!
Yay!
Like and
Time.
Like and subscribe.
Is there nothing else that...
I wonder if it's because of this. Hold on. I'm gonna go cry.
You're such a pretty man, Joel. Look at him. Isn't he cute?
I am cute, don't you know?